Cruiser riders and sport bike fast boys seem to be perpetually at odds. One of the biggest reasons for this fissure in the two-wheeled community is due to the fundamental disconnect in their approach to riding. There is a recognizable difference in why cruiser riders or sport bike riders got on their bikes in the first place. A lot of sport bike riders ride for the love of speed and performance. They like hitting up twisty roads and pushing the limits of themselves and their bikes. They love feeling the increasing lean angles during cornering and revving the engine up all the way to the top of the red line on straightaways. 16,000 RPMs is pretty sweet. Motorcycling for a lot of sport bike riders is about the pursuit of high-speed thrills, and these bikes are one of the cheapest ways to experience extreme speeds and rapid acceleration. And that's a big motivating factor for why a lot of riders pursue riding motorcycles in the first place. They want to chase the thrill of high speeds and fuel the adrenaline rush. Whereas many cruiser riders start riding bikes for completely different reasons. For a lot of cruiser boys, motorcycles are less about chasing high speeds and alternatively seen as a form of leisure and relaxation. It's all about getting your knees out in the breeze, is a common phrase you'll hear cruiser riders say. They just like getting out, getting on two wheels, and having a good time on some scenic back roads without putting too much emphasis on extreme speeds or tight corners. Sure, pretty much any motorcycle is going to feel relatively quick compared to the average commuter car, and plenty of big V-twin cruisers put down a surprising amount of torque that can be very exciting. But most people who ride cruisers aren't pursuing high-speed riding. They just want to get out of town, enjoy some views, enjoy the rumble and character of a cruiser engine, maybe grab some food and have a good time. Both approaches to motorcycling definitely have their merit, and I personally can say I've come around to appreciate every angle of the two-wheeled life. I've done plenty of aggressive riding on sport bikes as well as track riding. Heck, I've ridden some of the fastest motorcycles around. I owned a Turbo Hayabusa and a built H2, but there are definitely times that I also just want to ride for the sake of riding and I don't want to go super fast. Sometimes a leisurely cruise to appreciate the scenery and experience some peace without the risks that come from crazy fast riding just hits the spot. And since cruiser riders and sport bike riders are pursuing two drastically different riding styles, the ergonomics of their bikes and the way in which they are ridden couldn't be more different. Your quintessential cruiser rider would feel like he's riding a futuristic alien spacecraft after swinging a leg over a sport bike. Sport bikes are designed for motorcycle racing. A lot of them are homologated to literally do so. So they have low clip-on handlebars connected to fork tubes, combined with foot pegs that are high and back behind you. This puts the rider in a super committed position where they are almost sitting within the motorcycle. This obviously has a ton of advantages for racing, track riding, or a spirited rip on the twisties where you can have more control over the bike. Conversely, cruisers typically have mid-mounted or forward foot controls where their legs are either directly below them or in front of them. Paired with a tall and swept-back handlebar, riding on a cruiser is very relaxed. A lot of cruiser bikes lean into this relaxed riding ergonomics even further by installing big, huge aftermarket handlebars like ape hangers or T-bars. Some big touring bikes even have floorboards installed instead of normal motorcycle foot pegs. Have you ever seen a Harley Davidson with floorboards? It seems foreign to put a floor with your feet on and a brake pedal that's literally linked like a car brake pedal. But again, these bikes are designed for comfort and relaxed riding. So cruiser riders will often install highway pegs so they can keep their feet even more elevated for comfort during long highway stretches. Cruiser seats are more comfortable and often have pretty spacious passenger accommodations. If it weren't for the fact that cruisers and sport bikes both have an engine and two wheels, they would practically appear to be two completely different types of vehicles. And because of the difference in riding style and positioning on these two types of motorcycles, cruiser riders and sport bike riders have very little in common in regards to their relationship with their respective machines. Because these riders are riding their bikes typically in very different ways, there's a big difference in the type of protective gear that they wear. Regardless of what type of bike you ride, you must assume the inherent risk that comes from riding a motorcycle. Bikes can be dangerous. There is no real way around it. So it's the responsibility of the rider to take measures to mitigate that risk as much as possible. And one of the easiest ways to do this is by wearing proper riding gear. If you were to go down on a bike, having high quality gear is going to make a huge difference in the type of injuries you could sustain or avoid. Despite this relatively common knowledge, cruiser riders seem to think of safety gear as more of a suggestion compared to their sport bike counterparts. I'm sure the avoidance of riding gear is multifaceted. A lot of cruiser boys think that because they're riding a cruiser, they're not going to be doing any crazy high speeds or cornering. They probably think that a leisurely ride in the country doesn't pose as much of a threat to their physical safety as hooning it up on a highway, roll races, or sport bikes bikes do, but unfortunately, no matter what speed you're riding at or what type of bike you're on or how familiar you are with the roads you're riding, there's always the risk of going down. There could be negligent drivers, unexpected road debris like gravel or clippings, or even a momentary lapse in judgment or attention as a rider. So the avoidance of safety gear for a lot of cruiser riders is just silly. I think there's also a cultural element to this. A lot of older cruiser riders just have a monkey see, monkey do relationship with not only gear, but the entire culture of American motorcycling. For instance, every Harley-Davidson rider seems like they were printed off at the assembly line. They've got the half-helmet brain bucket, the work boots and t-shirt they'll be riding in the summer. If the weather's a bit cooler, they'll wear a Harley-Davidson branded leather jacket that probably more closely resembles a lifestyle fashion jacket than a safety-rated garment designed for protection. And that's pretty radically different than sport bike riders. Of course, there are the jicks or squids that will ride in shorts and a t-shirt, but for the most part, most sensible sport bike enthusiasts recognize the risk of motorcycling and wear appropriate riding gear that's designed specifically for motorcycling. There's also a huge difference in what sport bike riders and cruiser riders expect when it comes to engine style and overall displacement. It's not uncommon for a cruiser to have an engine ranging from anywhere from 900cc to nearly 2000cc. If you're coming from the sport bike world, 2000cc sounds absolutely massive. Even a 1000cc superbike usually makes around 200 horsepower. But cruiser engines, especially big air-cooled V-twins, make power, or lack thereof, in an entirely different way. An air-cooled V-twin like those used by Harley-Davidson have a stroke much longer than traditional sport bike engines. This long stroke creates a whole lot of immediate lowdown torque while sacrificing massively at the top end power that comes from an engine that can rev higher than like 6,000 RPM. The difference in engine configuration between a lot of cruisers and sport bikes creates a totally different power delivery and riding style. So because a big loping air-cooled V-twin cannot rev very high and doesn't make much top end power, they are able to utilize a massive engine without becoming an unwieldy death machine. And because of the normalization of massive air-cooled engines, a lot of old-school cruiser riders have a really bizarre understanding of motorcycle size. You hear cruiser dudes saying things unironically like, "Oh, that's a cute little 600 you have there. What are you gonna get a grown-up bike?" without considering that a 600 makes 50% more power than their cruiser while weighing substantially less.
This is a Kawasaki Ninja 500 SE, and it could be yours if you become a member over on YamiNoob.co. I give away motorcycles all the time. I've given away over 53 bikes at this point, valued at well over $500,000. We've done top of the line bikes, beginner bikes, crazy scramblers, all kinds of things in between. And this new Ninja 500 SE is the new bike we have to give away. Become a member over at YamiNoob.co and rack up your chances to win this motorcycle. It could end up in your driveway.
Cruiser guys are also fiercely loyal to that V-twin sound. Harley-Davidson has a deeply embedded itself in American culture, and for a lot of people, a motorcycle equals a Harley-Davidson. And while there are countless elements of the brand identity and the bikes themselves that have left an indelible mark in the hearts and minds of the middle-class suburbanites from sea to shining sea, an aspect that seems to be universally adored by cruiser guys is that grumbly V-twin sound. Like it or not, a Harley-Davidson V-twin or a 45-degree metric V-twin designed to sort of mimic the Harley-Davidson character does create an exhaust note that is quite unlike any other type of bike. For cruiser guys, the throaty grumble is the pinnacle of auditory sensations. And really, has any cruiser rider ever kept a stock exhaust on their motorcycle? Definitely not. And if anything, they usually end up with the most open and free-flowing pipes to have the loudest sound possible, often at the expense of any potential power gains. Sometimes these straight pipes or short exhausts can end up even robbing the bike of potential power. Compare that to the screaming, high-revving sound of an inline-4 that sport bike riders recognize of the most elite tier of engine noises. A cruiser rider appreciates the character of a V-twin, while a sport bike rider recognizes that a high-revving 4-cylinder engine is a representation of power and performance. One important note I wanted to make here is that sport bike riders also have a wider palette of engines available to them in sport bike chassis. You have 3 cylinders, you also have V-twin sport bikes, you have V4 motorcycles, and of course the venerable inline 4 as well. There's also a new plethora of inline twins, the parallel twin motorcycles that are making the rounds, like the RS660 and the R7. So for sport bike riders, you have more of a range of engine configurations, whereas cruisers are almost always V-twins, with the very rare exceptions of something like a Triumph Rocket 3 or a Yamaha VMAX. Cruiser riders are typically older than sport bike riders too, and I obviously recognize this isn't always the case. I've seen plenty of old-timer track riders that are still ripping sport bikes well into their 50s, but on average, I think it's fair to say the demographics for sport bike riders definitely skews a bit younger. Sport bikes are attractive to younger riders for a multitude of reasons. They offer the promise of high-speed thrills, aggressive styling, and a youthful prowess, whereas older riders have either grown up under the veil of V-twin cruisers and have always had an affinity for that style of riding, or they have moved on from purpose-built sport bikes as they've gotten older. Sooner or later, a lot of sport bike riders recognize that being comfortable on their bike will ultimately start to provide a more positive riding experience than being as fast as possible. Some sport bike riders may just make the move to naked bikes, or others will end up living the ADV life. I mean, hey, look at me, I have a Touareg 660 in the garage now. But others may end up getting into cruisers as they get older and want a more relaxed riding style while they still enjoy life on two wheels. No matter how you slice it, the cruiser demographic typically ends up being a bit older than sport bike riders. Sport bikes on the street are really just a young man's game at the end of the day. And lastly, cruiser riders and sport bike riders have a pretty different approach to group rides. If a group ride is predominantly made up of cruisers, it's going to be a pretty chill outing. A bunch of guys on their cruisers in leather jackets rolling around town, making a ton of noise and ultimately stopping off at a gastro pub where they'll stand around and stare at their big shiny baggers while sipping some cold ones. Whereas sport bike group rides can definitely get a little more intense and kind of have a bad rap nowadays. There's always the young squids who are trying to cut their teeth on the twisties and show off amongst the pack. Typical alpha male behavior there. There will usually be a much greater emphasis on speed and technical riding compared to the leisurely stroll that the cruiser group takes. Sport bike group rides will have the quintessential street squids that want to put on a show, highway roll racing, and popping wheelies around town. You're definitely more often likely to see a dozen sport bike riders lane split past you on the freeway than you would a dozen cruisers. I mean, a cruiser is probably too slow and too large to lane split, but I think you get the gist. A lot of the differences in the way cruiser guys and sport bike guys behave in riding groups is likely heavily dependent on the difference in age as well. Younger riders can be a lot more chaotic, especially when they're in a group and that testosterone mob mentality starts kicking in. Pair that with some Kodak courage that stems from all the action cameras, you're bound to see some excessive behavior. Whereas cruiser guys just use group rides as an excuse to go meet up at the bar and talk about their wives and kids and stuff. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Obviously, this is all very nuanced, and I'm sure there's plenty of riders who enjoy all types of bikes and different styles of riding, so don't take this all too seriously. If you own a cruiser and a sport bike in your garage, drop me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe if you like the content here. If you want more exclusive content and the chance to win a 2025 Ninja 500 SE, head over to yammynoob.co and learn more about memberships and the rules of entry. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you later. Fact: it takes a drop of water 90 days to travel the entire Mississippi River. Goodbye.
Keep watching Yammy Noob!